Does the ego live on in the same way as the spirit?
So the ego, what is it? Well, it's brittle. It is only as deep as your incarnation, as we like to say. It is simply the outer-facing shell that your spirit chooses, and I use that term loosely, chooses to express itself in the world in which you live. Of course, the ego is formed of not just of the influence of your true self, your higher spirit, as it were, but also the influence of the environment around you. And you can imagine that if a person goes through a traumatic experience, that impacts their ego, their personality, the way in which they face the world, because that is the ego. It is the face that you have to the world. So it is necessarily a somewhat misshapen thing, unless you're lucky enough to be brought up by a couple of bodhisattvas, which is not likely, then it will be rather damaged. And indeed, this is the case with all of us. Our egos are far from perfect. And yet, the ego is something which is essential for life on Earth. The ego means literally I. So it is that sense of I-ness, that sense of individuality, of separateness. It is essential. For example, if you are a prehistoric man on the plains of Africa and a large saber-toothed tiger is coming towards you, or a lion or any large predator, a leopard, a pack of wolves, you name it, then if you don't have a sense of I-ness, of separation, of individuality, then I suppose you would just sit there and get eaten and not worry about it, which is not really very effective for the evolution of the human species. Well, as a species, you wouldn't go very far. So evolution would be rather damaged by that. So the ego, the sense of I-ness, is vitally important for survival upon the planet. But as humanity evolves, or actually technically, as humanity involves, and it returns to the source, that's the opposite of evolution, this is involution now, then we learn gradually to do away with that ego, to see through it, to the spirit which is behind it. But this takes a lot of time and a lot of practice. But eventually, you will lose the ego, and you will see it for what it is, which is simply a shell, which has its uses. But like all things, when you no longer need them, just get rid of them. They're not needed. And you move on without it. I've spoken enough. So thank you. And yes, perhaps I shall address you another time. Farewell.
Thank you, Stephen. Lindsley?
Well, we're going to throw a spanner in the works because we think ego has got to be experienced to all degrees. What's the point of having a life if you don't have some expression in it? Now, I get what you're saying there, young man, that eventually, as you evolve, whatever phrase you want to use, you lose that ego. But what I'm saying is, you're nobody unless you've got a bit of ego about you. And no point in being meek if you want to get on in the world, but no point in being brash if you want to get on in the world. But you've got to be one or the other at some point, I think. So that's my tuppence worth, and I will leave you all to it.